The Pilgrims' First Thanksgiving by Anne McGovern and Elroy Freem. A long time ago, some women, children, boys and girls, one dog and one cat. Now, I don't know how they knew there was just one dog and one cat, but that's what the book says. Sailed on a ship across the sea. They left the old country because they could not pray the way they wanted to. So they asked the King of England if they could sail away and see if they couldn't find a shorter route to India where they got spices for cooking. These spices were things like cinnamon and salt and pepper and garlic. So they were going to India to see if they could do it a shorter way. They were also looking for a place where they could call home and they could do church and pray and talk to God like they wanted to, not the way the King of England wanted them to. So he said, okay. The people were called Pilgrims, and the ship was called the Mayflower. It was actually a group of 3 ships. One was the Nina, one was the Pinta, and one was the Mayflower. The Mayflower was as big as 2 trucks. It's not very big. It takes a long time to go from England to America. But it was not really big enough. The Pilgrims and the sailors crowded together to sleep. They crowded together to eat. The children had no room to run around and play. They had no toys, and they had to leave most of their belongings back in England. The children hated the food on the ship. They had to eat it, though. There was nothing else to eat. You didn't like it, you didn't eat it, you got pretty hungry. Nothing but the same old salted beef and fish. A little bit of hard, dry bread or biscuits, and a smaller amount of cheese, and a little tiny bit of butter. After a while, the food turned bad. There was not enough water for drinking or washing. The children couldn't sleep in a warm, cozy bed. They slept on a hard, cold floor of the ship. They slept in the clothes they wore each day, and their clothes were torn and dirty and smelly. Day by day, things got worse. The storms came and the winds blew. The waves tossed the ship about. The Mayflower rolled and creaked in the stormy sea. The rain soaked the ship. The rain poured on the Pilgrims, and they were cold and wet. Many of the Pilgrims got really sick. It was a terrible voyage. Would it ever end? They prayed each day that they would see some land. They sailed away in the warm September. Now it was cold November. They had been on the Mayflower for 2 months and 5 days. The next day they saw the land. Oh, they were so excited. Wouldn't you be excited? They were very happy, but they were scared too. What kind of land was this? There were no homes. There were no stores. There were no people to meet them. Only empty, white, sandy beaches with trees and bushes. Oh, but it was so good to be on land again. The Pilgrim children ran up and down the beach, feeling the sand and the land beneath their feet. Winter. Winter was coming. The Pilgrims had to find a safe place for all of them to live. Every day the group of Pilgrims searched the countryside. At last they came to a place that had running brooks and rivers, good land for planting, and a good place to build their town. They named their town Plymouth. They wanted a street to go from the shore to the top of the hill. They wanted a fort on the top of the hill. They wanted houses on both sides of the street. They would have to make everything all by themselves. It would take a very, very long time to finish building Plymouth. In the meantime, they would have to sleep on the Mayflower. The first winter in Plymouth was terrible. The Pilgrims, terrible for the Pilgrims. They could not finish building their homes before the snow came. They could not find enough food in the forest. The Pilgrims worked as hard as they could, but they were hungry and cold and weak. That winter, many Pilgrims got very sick, and most of the Pilgrims died. After winter comes springtime. As the last snows began to melt, spring was coming. There was so much work to be done. The Pilgrims worked every day but Sunday. What did they do on Sunday? That was the time to think about God. They prayed, they sang, and they listened to preaching about Jesus. Every day but Sunday, the Pilgrims worked very hard. They worked making homes. They made their homes from bark and branches. They made roofs from straw and vines. Each house had only one room and one small space upstairs. The houses got cold when the wind blew through the branches of the walls. The houses got wet when the rain dripped down through the holes in the roof. Only heat came to the house through a fire in the fireplace. Sometimes sparks flew up the chimney as the straw roof and set the straw roof on fire. Everybody ran outside to put the fire out. The Pilgrims worked on making furniture for their homes. They didn't make much, just some stools and benches and beds. To save space, the children's beds were pushed underneath Mom and Dad's bed, so they had room during the day. The Pilgrims drank from mugs made of leather and wood. Their plates and bowls were wooden too. The Pilgrims used seashells for spoons, and they had no forks. The only iron things in the house were iron pots and pans. One big iron pot was used for making stew, or making candles, or making soap. The Pilgrims worked planting their gardens. Each family planted a small garden with seeds that they had brought over on the Mayflower. The Pilgrims made a good friend. Their good friend's name was Squanto. Squanto lived near Plymouth before the white man came. He taught the Pilgrims everything about the land he knew as well. He took the Pilgrims to the river and showed them where the fish swam, and the best way to catch the fish. He took the Pilgrims to the forest and showed them where to find the deer and the turkey and how to hunt them. He showed the Pilgrims where wild plants grew, the ones that were good to eat, the ones that were not good to eat, and the ones that made good medicine. He showed the Pilgrims the best way to plant the corn. Squanto lived with the Pilgrims for the rest of his life. The Pilgrim children loved him and followed him everywhere. He taught them stories and Indian words. He taught them how to make a trap and how to skin animals. The children learned many things from Squanto. There was no real school that first year in Plymouth. The children learned reading and writing. Excuse me. From the Pilgrims. Let me start again. The children learned reading and writing from the Pilgrims who already knew how. The children learned things at Plymouth. They learned good manners at mealtime. Good manners meant standing, eating up. They stood up while they ate. They ate the food with their hats off. And they did not speak unless the grown-ups spoke to them first. I'm sorry. They ate with their hats on. Today, we don't eat with our hats on usually at the table. The Pilgrim children learned to work hard, just as hard as the grown-ups. They had to watch the cornfield and shoo away the birds and the animals. They had to make big roasts and turkeys. They sat near a hot fire and turned a stick for the roast. That job took almost all day. They had other special jobs too. They had to make mattresses for sleeping. They stuffed pine needles or rags and feathers into big bags. They walked miles to gather grasses for the roofs of the houses. They dug clams out of the mud, picked black mussels from the rocks in the water. Every day they cooked and they served and they helped with the washing, the making of soap, and the making of candles. Everyone worked harder than they had ever worked before. They worked from the morning until it was night. No one wanted to give up or go back. When the Mayflower sailed back to England in April, there was not one single pilgrim on that boat. By the summer, 7 houses were finished and more were being built. The gardens were bursting with vegetables and the corn was growing tall. The Pilgrims met more friendly Indians who lived nearby. Their new friends showed the children where to find nuts and wild fruit. The Pilgrims and the Indians made flour and cornbread, and they all ate together. Summer was the best time for the Pilgrims. There was plenty for everyone to eat, and there would be plenty when the winter time came. No one would go hungry this year. The Pilgrims wanted to celebrate. So we have the first Thanksgiving. The first Thanksgiving in America lasted for 3 days. From the forest, the Pilgrims got wild turkeys, wild geese, ducks. The Indians brought 5 deer. From the waters, they caught lobster, clams, oysters, and lots of fish. From the gardens, they grabbed cucumbers, carrots, cabbages, turnips, radishes, onions, and beets. Corn was cooked in so many different ways. And there was popcorn too. There were wild fruits for dessert. Thanksgiving was a time for eating and for sharing. All the Pilgrims took part. So did their Indian friends. 90 Indians came. There were more Indians than there were Pilgrims. The men and boys played games, and the games were jumping and running and racing contests. The women and the girls spent most of their time cooking and serving and cleaning up. The Pilgrims had so much to be thankful for. The long, hard, terrible year was over. They gave thanks for good friends, new homes, plenty of food. They gave thanks for new life they had begun in Plymouth. What are some things that you're thankful for? Mom and dad, aunts and uncles, grandmas, grandpas, food, toys? Think about it and then share with your friends. Thanks for coming.